I was asked up to speak about a set of burden of disease estimates that we just had published regarding TB in adolescents. But this is a space where there's a lot of interesting work been going on over about the last 5 years. So I thought I would give sort of an overview of that work in general and then lead into our work in particular. So TB, I think, is unique among infectious diseases in that it's the subject of surveillance in almost every country in the world. And those data are reported to WHO each year, and WHO use them to produce national, regional and global estimates of TB incidence. And they achieve that with different methods in different countries. So your best case scenario is when you have a surveillance system that you're very confident about the function of, where you think you diagnose near enough to 100% of people with TB in a timely fashion. And that's the case in Australia and in most of the high-income countries. And so in that scenario, WHO can take that data, make a couple of small tweaks, and then that's pretty much your incidence estimate. Your second best case scenario is when you have a nationally representative survey of TB prevalence, and then you can make some assumptions about the relationship between prevalence and incidence, and use prevalence survey data to estimate incidence. And that's what WHO does for the countries in red on this map. The worst case scenario is when you have a surveillance system that you're quite certain underperforms to a significant degree, but you don't know exactly how much. Because in order to use imperfect notification data to estimate true incidence, you have to adjust it by some factor. And a country might be confident that they don't ascertain all of their TB cases, but they may not be able to tell you whether it's by 20% or by 40%. And which of those numbers they choose has a significant impact on the number that comes out at the end of the process. Now, 5 years ago, we were all saying that 9 million people develop TB every year, and now we're all saying that 10.4 million people develop TB each year. And the reason for that change is that more countries have moved from the light blue group to the red group by undertaking national TB prevalence surveys for the first time. And in some very large, very high TB burden countries, those surveys revealed that TB case detection was actually much worse than had previously been thought. The first country where that happened was Nigeria, then it happened again in Indonesia, and then it happened again in the Philippines. And those are 3 of the 6 highest TB burden countries globally. So those findings had a big impact on the global burden of disease estimates. They were offset to some degree by findings in other countries where it turned out that actually case detection was much better than had been previously thought, which was the case in Ethiopia, Vietnam and Bangladesh. But on the whole, the process of rolling out these surveys have revealed bigger gaps in case detection in some countries than had previously been realised. Right now, South Africa is undertaking their first national TB prevalence survey, which may also have some significant implications depending on the findings. And India is planning their first national survey after several subnational surveys. So it's possible that the estimates may change again in the future, depending on the findings of those surveys. That's the easy stuff. When this gets really difficult is when you try to undertake this same process for the burden of disease in children. Because although we know that notification data regarding TB in adults isn't perfect, we are almost always in the worst case scenario when it comes to data on kids. We know that data on TB in kids is very unreliable because differential diagnosis can be very difficult, microbiologic confirmation is very difficult, and children are often treated in health services that don't have the same strong relationships with NTPs that mainstream TB services do. On top of that, while you know that TB data on children are normally unreliable, you almost never know exactly how unreliable, because children are never included in national TB prevalence surveys. So you're always in this worst case scenario of you know that you can't necessarily trust the data, but you have no idea how far off it is. Different groups have taken different approaches to solving that problem over the past few years. So when WHO began and did their first set of estimates for children, they took a reasonable approach of doing the best they could with the data that were available, and took a similar approach to what you do in adults. You take a view of all of the data that are reported by countries, you do the best you can to fill in the gaps and estimate the extent of underdetection, and then you use that to say, well, given the data that we do have available, this is what we think the burden of disease is. The other extreme from that approach is to ignore the data on children entirely and say, we don't trust these data, but we have all of these data about TB in adults. We also have census data about populations and communities and household structures. We have information about how transmissible TB is from adults to children, and we have information about how often children who are exposed to TB progress to disease. And you can feed all of that into a model and then try to estimate from what we know about TB in adults how many children get infected with TB every year and how many of those are likely to develop TB. And that's the approach that Pete Dodd takes. You can also take sort of a more moderate approach where you use just the data on confirmed disease in children, and you say, well, we have these data that we are confident about smear positive or expert positive disease in kids. We think that that represents X percentage of all TB in kids. And so if a country tells you that they have 1,000 children with smear positive TB, they probably have 10,000 children with TB in total. And that's the approach that Helen Jenkins and Ted Cohen took in their estimates. And what WHO now does is an ensemble approach that combines these different methodologies. But the childhood estimates is a space that's been evolving, really significantly over the past 5 years. Back in 2014, which seems a very long time ago now, Steve asked me to do something significantly simpler, which was to take a first stab at a set of estimates for incidence in adolescents and young adults. And that's simpler because the data regarding adolescents are a bit more trustworthy than the data regarding younger children, because adolescents develop adult-type microbiologically confirmable disease more commonly, and they're also more likely to be treated in mainstream adult health services. The difficulty with the adolescents is that when you're talking about the 10 to 19 age group, they get mixed in with other age groups due to the reporting formats that WHO use. So if you want to estimate burden of disease for that group, you have to sort of pull apart estimates for different age groups in order to get at them. So what we did for this first set of estimates was take all of the data that were reported to WHO in 2012, fill in the gaps regarding extrapulmonary and smear negative TB as best we could, and then adjust for sort of the standard WHO estimates of underreporting in each country, and then pull them apart into these 5-year age groups based on more detailed data that we got from countries with more detailed data available. When we do that, we come up with an estimate of 1.8 million incident cases of TB among 10 to 24-year-olds in 2012. Many more cases in the 20 to 24 age group than in the 10 to 14 age group, which is consistent with historical data about the age-related epidemiology of TB, and the geographic distribution that you would expect based on what we already know about the global TB epidemic. Because these estimates assume that TB case detection is the same in adolescents and young adults as it is in older age groups, if anything, they're likely to be an underestimate. That concern is supported by data that have come out of the Philippines National Prevalence Survey and some other national prevalence surveys that have shown a bigger gap in case detection in adolescents and young adults than in other age groups. And that's consistent with what's known about adolescents and young adults' access to health services in general in low and middle income countries, that they often have reduced capacity to access services because they have reduced financial means. Other research groups are working on their own sets of estimates at the moment. There's a group at Harvard who are working on their own estimates with their own methodology. And with increasing interest in the adolescent age group in connection with vaccine trials and sort of an increasing appreciation of their specific risks in TB, it's likely, and I hope, that more groups will start working on these questions and bringing different statistical methods to bear. And so it's possible that this is another space that will sort of undergo iterations of estimates, although hopefully we'll come to, vaguely similar conclusions. So I'd like to acknowledge Steve and Justin as well, who's coming up tomorrow, as well as Babis Sismodis at WHO, who made time in a really busy schedule to help me out with this work, and also the TBCRE for funding this work and then the remainder of my PhD as well. And if you'd like to read the paper, it came out in the ERJ earlier this year. Thank you.
Questions?
Kathryn, I want to ask, do you know if any of the new prevalence surveys are considering the inclusion of children 10 to 15 years of age, so bringing the age bracket down for prevalence surveys? Is that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know whether anybody is considering it. The old Philippines surveys did include 10 to 19-year-olds. and those surveys used smear and culture. The most recent survey used expert and culture, but didn't include the 10 to 14 age group. So as more surveys are done with expert, I can see an argument for including the 10 to 14-year-olds. But the efficiency is still going to be just so much lower than... So I suspect the reason that nobody did it after the first Filipino one is just that you screen 10,000 kids and you find 2 and it's probably just not worth it. But it would be easier to make that case for screening with expert than for screening with smear, certainly.
What about methods that is used to assess the situation in Pacific Island countries, PNG and also Kiribati and a couple of other countries? That's one. Second is, do you think it's a good idea programmatically to have something like a TV dashboard, which political leaders or country leaders could use to review and monitor TV progress? And third question is, do you think the existing database is good enough to have a TV dashboard?
So with regard to the second and third question, it varies hugely by country, the quality and the detail of TV data that are available. But more and more countries are implementing like web-based, case-based electronic surveillance systems. And those systems are able to produce quite detailed reports, and more countries are working towards that kind of system where you can run sort of basic queries and it shows you nice, easy to read summary data. So yeah, I definitely think that is happening. What exactly is your question about the Pacific countries?
I generally do not see much data about the Pacific in the global TV report.
Sure. I think the issue is just that with the exception of PNG, they're just such small countries that have such small numbers of TB cases that they don't generate a lot of attention. In most of the Pacific countries individually, you might only be talking about a few hundred cases of TB per year, so they just sort of get drowned out by the bigger countries in the Western Pacific region.
Do we think that that's underdiagnosis, or do we think that that's real?
I think, again, it varies hugely within the Pacific, right? Like Fiji is like 50 per 100,000, and I think that's felt to be, genuine. But then, yeah, Kiribati and Marshall Islands have, sky-high incidence rates. So I think it's a really diverse region. But there's definitely access to care issues, transport issues, laboratory capacity issues. And in the countries with lower rates, there's also differential diagnosis issues, right? Because you have other, lung cancer is more common than TB, so how do you tease those things out? So I think there's different issues in different countries.
One last question.
So given that TB is often quite a cluster disease, and given that the mapping work on MDR TB in cities has shown quite a lot of heterogeneity, as we move towards TB elimination, do you think we're going to need more subnational prevalence surveys, or basically, do you think this is too blunt a tool to really guide us as to whether we're improving or not?
Yeah, I think that is a genuine challenge. I think certainly the national TB prevalence surveys, especially in really diverse countries, don't give you a sufficiently accurate picture with regard to geography or age, or a variety of other sort of relevant indicators. The problem with subnational surveys, like Greg's work, is one of the few sort of, like, you need 50,000 people. Unless you're in South Africa or a really high burden setting, you need very large numbers of people to get precise estimates, and that's just not necessarily feasible in a lot of settings. So you can do them. India's done a lot of them, other countries have done a lot of them, but a TB prevalence survey is a really big undertaking unless you're targeting a very high prevalence community.